Joining me now from ONS Europe is Ben Hickey, Chief Customer Officer at Lumina Networks. Ben, thanks for joining us on Telecom TV. What's the role of open source in 5G networks?
Yeah, if we think about 5G networks, what's going to be critical to those deployments being successful is the fact that we really need to have a virtualized infrastructure that's composable, and therefore when you think about that, the amount of capital expenditure that's going to go into 5G networks means that the operators will want to see commercial tension maintained in that infrastructure they're deploying. So open source really fits that role where it can actually help assist with both the orchestration and the management of these dynamic virtual components, as well as provide that layer of abstraction that sits on top to allow you to reduce the complexity in having multiple different vendors in your network.
And which open source projects do you think are going to play the most important roles?
Yeah, there are definitely some which obviously we have a vested interest in that are quite mature. And so if you think about things like Open Daylight and the role of an SDN controller, really being able to sit across multiple domains, multiple layers in the technology, multiple technologies, multiple vendors, that abstraction capability becomes critical. But then there are others that are evolving quite quickly as well, and so in the orchestration space, both ONAP and OSM will play an important role. And we're starting to see some emerging, some critical focus in areas like network service mesh. Because when you look at one element of the 5G architecture, which is edge compute, there's been a hell of a lot of focus on how do we actually orchestrate and manage those virtual instances running on the edge compute. But there's not been a lot of focus just now on how do we actually tie that back into the wide area in the physical network. And so that sort of heterogeneous kind of networking technologies is something that we focus on. And that's where I think a project like network service mesh will be quite exciting going forward.
How will the community support continued improvements to the scalability of open source?
Well, as with all engineering efforts, what you find is though they tend to go through phases. And so in one period of time, you might find that the engineering focus is really upon new feature, new capability development. And then in other periods of time, you find that actually the focus shifts to hardening, scaling, reliability. So I think what we've seen just recently is there's been quite a lot of focus in the communities on adding new capabilities and features. But then that's a role that Lumina plays for our customers, in that we actually buffer our customers from the communities and some of those shifts over time by providing the hardening and the ease of use, so that we can actually complement the changes in the community but ensure that the reliability and the scaling capabilities are where it needs to be for production deployments.
For those CSPs with a lot of proprietary technology in their networks who are looking to make the move to open source, where's the tipping point for them to commit to the value and process of open source?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question, and it's one that we actually we try to educate a lot of the people we work with, because sometimes there can be a confusion that you think, well, open source is great, so does open source need to go everywhere? Now the answer to that question really is no, and so the way we look at it is that there's actually a huge benefit with, if you like, a surgical application of open source just in the right area. And so those areas really are that abstraction layer that can sit on top of the heterogeneous networks, as we mentioned, to make it much easier to deploy applications and new capabilities on top. And so with open source being built from the ground up, taking into account what's available in the industry at large, as opposed to a single vendor's implementation, that really fulfills that abstraction kind of goal. And so using open source there is really critical. And so we see that some operators have really bought into that. Others are still unsure of where the value will come from. And so it's really helping them to understand how much value they'll get from having a multi-vendor network, or having a multi-layer or multi-domain network under the control of a single set of applications. Those benefits will start to bring those other operators into play.